If you suddenly time travel to the dark ages and had to survive just 24 hours, you'd be in serious trouble. Life back then was harsh, dirty and dangerous. So today, we will see in the video why we cannot survive even 24 hours in the dark ages. But before I start, if you are new to the channel and love history, definitely subscribe to the History Facts Show and press the bell icon. Thank you. In the dark ages, clean drinking water was hard to find. Most people avoided drinking plain water because people dumped human waste, animal carcasses, and trash into rivers and lakes. Wells could be contaminated by nearby outhouses or dead animals. Drinking bad water could give you bloody diarrhea, cholera, or typhoid fever, which could kill you in days. Most people drank ale, a weak beer, instead of water because it was boiled during brewing, which killed bacteria. After you deal with clean water, you will have problem with food. Food in the dark ages was seasonal, limited, and often unsafe. For common people, there was bread and porridge, which was the main source of food back then. You have vegetables, dairy, but you can't eat too much meat. For nobles and kings or other rich people, there was meat every day. They have exotic species, sweet foods, and bread made of fine wheat. As an outsider, you wouldn't have access to noble food. You would have relied on what peasants ate, mostly bread, porridge, and vegetables, which may be spoiled or contaminated. There was no refrigeration. Meat was often rotten unless preserved with salt or smoking. If you tried to forage for food, you might accidentally eat poisonous berries or mushrooms. Eating the wrong thing could make you sick or kill you quickly. The Dark Ages were filled with deadly plagues, fevers, and infections. If you caught one of these, you would have little chance of survival. The Black Death killed over 50 million people in the 1300s, nearly half of Europe's population. If you got near an infected person or were bitten by a flea, you would die painfully in days. There was another weird killer, known as the sweating sickness, or also known as the 24-hour killer. There was a sudden outbreak in England in 1485 to 1551. People feared it more than the plague. Since the cause is still unknown, you would have no way to protect yourself. There was also smallpox, the bloody diarrhea. There were no antibiotics, no painkillers, and no real treatment. People didn't know about bacteria and viruses, so they blamed demons, curses, or bad air. Most treatments were superstitious, like bloodletting. If you got sick, a priest was more useful than a doctor. If you got even a small cut or scratch, you would be in huge danger because there were no disinfectants, bandages. A tiny wound could become a death sentence in the Dark Ages. Winters were long, freezing, and deadly, especially if you didn't have proper shelter or clothing. The Little Ice Age, which was between 1300 to 1800s, made winters even colder than today. In medieval Europe, winter temperatures could drop -10 degrees Celsius or 14 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. Many people and animals froze to death in harsh winters. There was no insulations, just thin wooden walls or mud and straw. Rich nobles and kings who lived in castles, they were freezing because stone walls were cold like ice and fireplaces couldn't heat the huge rooms. They burned wood constantly, but smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. If you arrived in winter without medieval clothes or shelter, you could freeze to death in a few hours. Summers in the Dark Ages could also be extremely dangerous, especially since there were no modern ways to cool down. In southern Europe, summer temperatures could reach 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. No AC, no fans, no ice. There were no ways to escape the heat except by finding shade. If you arrived in summer without water or shade, you could die from dehydration or heart stroke within hours. If you suddenly appeared in the Dark Ages, people would not trust you. In fact, they might think you were a witch, a demon, or a spy, which could get you tortured, imprisoned, or burned alive. In the Dark Ages, people were deeply religious and superstitious. If someone seemed different or suspicious, they were often accused of witchcraft. Modern clothing didn't exist. If you showed up wearing anything unusual, people would immediately suspect sorcery. Medieval English, French, or Latin sounded completely different from modern languages. If you spoke clearly, no one would understand you, and they might think you were casting spells. If you knew about germs and told people to wash their hands, they would think you were using magic. If you knew about astronomy and predicted an eclipse, you would be accused of controlling the sky. If you know how to make fire easily using a lighter or matches, they would call you a devil's servant. If you wore glasses, people might think you had magic eyes. If you had a phone or a watch or a flashlight, they would call it witchcraft or demon magic. If you survive an illness that kills others, you would be accused of using dark powers. Most people lived in small villages, where everyone knew each other. If you showed up with no family or history, people would wonder where you came from. They might think you were an escaped demon or stepsister. They would tie your hands and feet and throw you into a river. If you sank and drowned, you were innocent, but dead. If you floated, you were a witch, and they would burn you. People in medieval villages knew who was in charge. If you didn't know the king's name or local nobleman, you would look suspicious. Only merchants, nobles, and soldiers traveled alone. If you didn't fit those roles, people might assume you were an enemy spy. If people thought you were a spy, you would be locked in a dungeon and possibly executed. In the Dark Ages, law enforcement was weak or non-existent. This meant that robbers, killers, and desperate peasants could attack travelers without much risk. No police, no safe roads, just forests and paths full of criminals. If you travel alone, you were a guaranteed victim. Kings and lords only protected their own castles and lands. If you were robbed or killed, no one would come to help. Forget dollar bills or credit cards. Medieval money was all metal, coins made of gold, silver, or copper. If you somehow find medieval coins, you would need a bag just to carry them. Unlike today, where a dollar or euro works everywhere, medieval money changed in every kingdom and even different towns. If you used fake or clip money even by accident, you could be whipped or executed. If you won or found money, the king in charge would take a cut immediately. If you couldn't pay taxes, you'd be punished or thrown in death prison. If you were suddenly dropped into the Dark Ages, your first reaction wouldn't be fear or confusion. It would be disgust. The overwhelming stench of medieval life would hit you like a brick wall. There were no toilets, no sewers, just human waste everywhere. If you stepped in the wrong place, you might sink into a pool of waste. People literally threw buckets of poop out of their windows. Medieval people didn't have trash collection, so food waste just piled up. People in the Middle Ages hated bathing. Many believed that too much washing could make you sick. So if you get too close to someone, you might pass out from the smell. Medieval times were full of death, and corpses weren't always buried properly. Even churches, one of the cleanest places, had their own strange smells. In the Dark Ages, women weren't treated as independent people. Instead, they were seen as a property of their father, husband, or brother. If you get pregnant, you have to give birth. There was no contraception, no abortion, no options. Since there's no birth control, women had one baby after another until they died from exhaustion. You could be forced into a horrible marriage at a very young age. If you were a woman who was deeper independent or just unlucky, you could be accused of being a witch and burned alive. Your entire life would be endless, exhausting work. Medieval roads were not safe. As I said before, there were no police, no security, and no protection. If you travel alone, you were basically inviting trouble. Medieval Europe had lots of dangerous animals roaming the roads, especially in forests and mountains. There were no maps, no GPS, and no road signs. If you took a wrong turn, you might never find your way back. If you got injured, sick, or just exhausted on the road, you were in a serious trouble. You would have to walk, no matter what. There were no cars or ambulances. If you couldn't walk, you were left behind. Unless you were lucky enough to be born a rich noble, your chances of lasting 24 hours in the Dark Ages would be very low. So for today, don't forget to tell us how you felt. I really want to know. Let me know in the comments which era you want to survive next. Thanks a lot for watching the full video. See you in the next video. Stay well.